The deed to my grandfather's house slammed hard into my chest. The sheer force of the throw sent the crisp papers scattering, landing flat on the sweat-slicked canvas ring that reeked of cheap testosterone. "Sign it, you pathetic old hag," Judah, the blood brother I used to carry on my back, roared. His muscles gleamed with oil, his face twisted with greed and triumph. "Sign it, or I'll break your jaw right here. What makes a washed-up, useless woman like you think you get to keep this house?" "Down by the ropes, Lacey," his wife sneered. She crossed her arms, chewing her gum loudly. "Just roll over and end up on the street, Laney. Don't make your brittle bones pick up your own teeth." I didn't cry. I didn't step back. The draft from the industrial fan whipped the frayed edges of my t-shirt, brushing against the jagged scar cutting across my left ribs. The two of them had no idea they had just backed a woman forged in the worst hells overseas into a corner. And they had just personally stripped away their own last chance of walking out of here unhurt. I slowly unlaced my beat-up work boots, stepping my scarred bare feet onto the mat. Locking my dead eyes onto the hollow of that 210-pound fighter's throat, I smirked slightly, calculating the exact time. 3 seconds. Before I show you how those 3 seconds brutally crushed his arrogance, let's back up. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if this story hits close to home. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been stabbed in the back by your own flesh and blood? Now let's rewind to see exactly how this ugly night started. The claw hammer slipped, scraping my calloused knuckles against the rotting wood. I gritted my teeth, swallowed the sharp sting, and readjusted my grip. With a hard yank, I ripped the bent rusted nail free from the porch floorboards. It gave way with a dry, agonizing screech. Sweat dripped from my chin, mixing with the thick Ohio dust that coated my faded gray t-shirt. I was holding my grandfather's house together with cheap nails, scrap wood, and sheer stubbornness. It was the only place in the world where I could close my eyes without seeing ghosts. Then my phone buzzed. It vibrated violently against the damp planks, rattling like a warning bell. I dropped the hammer. My thumb, rough as sandpaper, wiped a smear of mud off the shattered glass screen. A text from Lacey, my brother's wife. "Bring the deed to Jude's gym right now. Appraiser comes tomorrow morning. We're listing it. Fight us and we call the cops to throw your trash on the curb." I didn't type a reply. I just stared at the cracked screen, watching the harsh white light illuminate the fractures in the glass. My own blood brother. I used to save my lunch money to buy him sneakers when our dad drank his paycheck away. I paid off this house so the bank wouldn't take it. Now they wanted to sell the only roof I had left just so Jude could buy a brand new lifted truck and Lacey could afford her acrylic nails. They were throwing me out like a stray dog. A suffocating weight pressed down on my chest. I didn't cry. Tears were a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. I stood up. My bad knee popped loudly in the quiet yard. I walked over to the side of the house, grabbed the heavy rubber garden hose, and twisted the rusted spigot. I let the freezing water blast directly into my face. It washed away the sawdust, the grime, and the heat. The shock hit my chest. My lungs hitched. I closed my eyes, letting the water run down my neck, soaking the collar of my shirt. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. I forced my racing heart rate to slow down. I shut the water off with a hard twist. I didn't bother to change my wet clothes. I didn't run a brush through my hair. I just grabbed my heavy brass keyring from the porch railing and climbed into my beat-up Ford F-150. The engine whined, coughing twice before roaring to life. I threw it into gear and tore out of the driveway, the tires crunching loudly against the gravel. The drive took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of absolute dead silence inside the dark cab. I drove past the rusted skeletons of abandoned steel mills, the crumbling brick storefronts of our dying town. The desolation outside matched the cold, empty hole opening up in my gut. My hands gripped the cracked leather steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned a bruised white. I pulled into the pothole-ridden parking lot of Jude's Iron. The blinding red neon sign flickered above the entrance, washing my face in a harsh, bloody glow through the windshield. I killed the engine. I stepped out, the soles of my boots hitting the asphalt with a heavy thud. I pushed the heavy glass door open. Instantly, a physical wall of noise and stench slammed into me. The bass from a violent rap track rattled the cheap foam ceiling tiles. The heavy rhythmic thud of leather gloves smashing into heavy bags echoed off the concrete walls. The air was thick, practically choking on the smell of sour sweat, spilled energy drinks, and dollar store body spray. I didn't walk further in. I stood completely still just inside the doorway. Habit took over. My eyes swept the room with cold mechanical precision, cutting through the chaos. 3 exit doors. 12 guys in sweaty tank tops hovering around the free weights, grunting and dropping iron plates. And right in the center, the elevated canvas boxing ring. Off to the side, old Mac paused. He leaned heavily on a mop handle, the bucket water murky and brown. His bad knee was braced in thick black neoprene. He looked up and caught my eye. Mac was the only one in this whole damn place who actually knew what I was. He didn't smile. His shoulders slumped, and he gave a slow, silent nod. He smelled the blood in the water. He knew the storm wasn't coming. It was already here. Behind me, the heavy glass door swung shut. The metal latch clicked into place, sealing off the humid night air and cutting off my only exit. I shoved my way through the knot of heavily tattooed gym bros. The air inside the place was thick, clinging to my skin like a wet rag. It smelled of stale beer, sweating out of pores, and cheap aerosol deodorant. A couple of guys whistled, mocking my dirt-stained jeans and oversized canvas jacket, but they stepped aside. Jude was in the center of the elevated ring. He bounced on his toes, throwing shadow punches at the humid air, his white hand wraps bright under the buzzing fluorescent lights. Below him, leaning against the steel ring post, Lacey was aggressively chewing a piece of gum, her long acrylic nails flying across her phone screen. Jude caught sight of me. He stopped bouncing. He dropped his hands and jerked his chin at old Mac. The blaring rap music abruptly cut off. The sudden silence was heavy. Only the squeak of rubber soles and the low hum of the overhead fans remained. Jude walked to the corner turnbuckle and snatched up a thick stack of papers. I stopped right at the edge of the ring apron. I didn't say a word. I just looked up at him. He didn't hesitate. He whipped the papers straight at my chest. The heavy staple scratched my collarbone as the bundle hit me. The crisp pages ripped apart, scattering and fluttering down onto the blue mat, sticking to the puddles of his own sweat. "Sign it, you pathetic old hag." Jude roared, his neck turning blotchy and red. "Sign it, or I'll break your jaw right here. What makes a washed-up, useless woman like you think you get to keep this house?" Down by the ropes, Lacey didn't even look up from her screen. "Just roll over and end up on the street, Laney. Don't make your brittle bones pick up your own teeth." I stood perfectly still. The draft from the industrial fan blew across my face. I looked down at the white page resting near the toe of my work boot. Deed of transfer. My brain dragged me backward. 5 years ago. A heavy steel transport truck baking in 120-degree heat, somewhere a world away. I remembered the metallic taste of dust coating the back of my throat as I chewed on a dry cracker. I remembered staring at a crumpled wire transfer receipt I kept folded in my chest pocket. 50 grand. Blood money. Every single dime I earned in that hellhole I sent straight back to an Ohio bank to save our bankrupt father from foreclosure. I bought that rotting wood house with my own blood. And now the golden boy who never paid a bill in his life wanted to rip it away to finance a lifted pickup truck. If you are listening to this and you know exactly how it feels to be bled dry by your own family, stop for a second. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to support me. Drop a comment below with the word money. Have you ever had a relative betray you over a dollar bill? Tell me I'm not the only one. I swallowed the bitter, dry lump in my throat. I didn't waste a single breath arguing. I didn't shed a tear for the brother I used to know. He was dead to me now. I reached up and grabbed the heavy brass zipper of my faded canvas jacket. I yanked it down. With a hard shrug, I peeled the thick fabric off my shoulders and let it drop to the cold concrete floor. The low murmurs in the gym died instantly. They stared at my bare arms. They stared at the jagged sunken scars wrapping around my shoulders and the thick burns crawling up my neck. I wasn't just a sister anymore. Old Mac's jaw locked tight. He knew what was waking up inside me. I grabbed the top rope, pulling myself up onto the edge of the mat, locking my dead eyes on Jude. I gripped the thick, tape-wrapped ring ropes. I didn't vault over them with athletic grace. I grabbed the top line, awkwardly lifting one stiff leg over, then dragging the other behind it. My bad knee popped loudly. I looked exactly like what they wanted to see, an exhausted aging woman breaking under the weight of her own miserable life. Down on the floor, Lacey's blonde friend snickered. I heard the sharp, artificial click of her phone camera capturing my humiliation. Across the canvas, Jude smirked. He smacked his taped gloves together. Pop, pop. The thick muscles in his neck strained shiny with sweat and cheap lotion. He was putting on a show, playing the tough guy for his wife and his gym buddies. They were all grinning, my own blood and the people he chose over me waiting to watch me bleed. I was completely alone in this room. I stood near the corner turnbuckle. Slowly, I bent down and untied the stiff frayed laces of my heavy work boots. I pulled them off, setting them neatly outside the ropes, aligning the heels with absolute precision. My bare feet touched the mat. The vinyl canvas was sticky-coated in the dried sweat of strangers. It gripped my skin. I looked down. My feet were a roadmap of ugly survival. Thick, cracked calluses lined my heels. Deep, jagged, metal-torn gouges ran up my left ankle. Ugly raised tissue that ached every time it rained. I paid for this family's survival with my own skin. Then I looked across the ring at Jude. He bounced lightly in expensive, lightweight boxing shoes. The skin peeking out above his socks was clean, unblemished, soft. Those were the feet of a boy who only fought in heated rooms on padded mats with a referee standing by to save his life when things got too hard. He didn't know what it meant to fight when nobody was coming to help. Old Mac ducked through the ropes. He carried the crumpled deed in one massive hand. He stepped between us, his bad knee dragging slightly on the canvas. 3 minutes. Mac grunted, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Knockout or tap. Don't do anything stupid, Jude. Mac didn't look at Jude when he said it. His tired eyes kept darting back to me, tight with a silent, desperate warning. He knew. Jude spat a glob of saliva onto the blue mat, his face twisting into an ugly sneer. Ain't no sister of mine in this ring, but get the hell out of the way. I didn't react to his screaming. The noise of the crowd, the humming of the overhead fluorescent lights, the chewing of Lacey's gum, it all faded into a dull, distant static. I closed my mouth. I pulled the stale air through my nose. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. I forced my heart to beat exactly when I told it to. I shut down the sister. I shut down the tired woman fixing a rotting roof. I didn't raise my hands into a traditional boxing guard. I let them hang completely loose, heavy and still at my sides. I tucked my chin down, burying it deep into my collarbone to shield my throat. I didn't look at Jude's angry eyes. I didn't look at his heavy white gloves. My gaze locked dead center on the waistband of his shorts. Where the hips go, the weight follows. Simple physics. The gym was dead silent now. They were holding their breath, waiting for the slaughter. I didn't blink. Ring the bell, Mac, I said. My voice was completely flat. It carried no pitch, no anger, no fear. Just a cold, mechanical certainty. The harsh metal clang of the bell shattered the heavy air. Before the sound even finished echoing off the concrete walls, 210 pounds of pure blind rage charged straight at me. The sharp clang of the bell was still echoing off the concrete walls when Jude moved. He didn't bother circling. He didn't throw a jab to measure distance. He just put his head down and charged like a runaway freight train. 210 pounds of cheap steroid rage and unchecked ego hurtling straight at me. He wanted this over in 3 seconds. He wanted to drop his older sister unconscious on the sticky canvas so he could flex for his buddies and hear his wife cheer. Jude planted his lead foot heavily on the mat, twisting his thick torso. He swung a massive overhand right, putting every single ounce of his weight behind the red leather glove. The punch was a wild, looping arc aimed directly at the side of my jaw. It was a kill shot. I didn't take a step back. I didn't slip to the outside or bob at the waist like they teach you in these air-conditioned gyms. When you learn how to stay alive in dark, cramped spaces where stepping backward means dying, you don't run from the impact. You build a wall. I didn't blink. I hunched my shoulders high, shrinking my profile, and buried my chin deep into my collarbone. At the very last fraction of a second, I tilted my head slightly forward, presenting the crown of my skull, the thickest, most dense piece of bone in the human body, directly into the path of his incoming fist. The collision was deafening. Thud, crack. The heavy leather smashed into my forehead. A wet, sickening pop followed instantly by the sharp, dry snap of dead branches breaking under a heavy boot. It wasn't my jaw. The kinetic force of a 210-pound man swinging at full speed met a solid, unyielding dome of bone. The violent energy had nowhere to go but backward. The small, fragile metacarpals in Jude's right hand and the delicate, complex joints of his wrist compressed, buckled, and crushed under their own massive momentum. Jude let out a high-pitched, breathless shriek. His forward momentum completely collapsed. He stumbled backward, the soles of his shiny boxing shoes tangling under him. He retreated 3 clumsy steps, pressing his trembling, ruined right hand tight against his stomach. His face, drained of all color, contorted in absolute, shocking agony. I stood exactly where I was. My bare feet hadn't shifted a single inch. A blinding flash of white light exploded behind my eyes. The shockwave rattled my brain against my skull, sending a heavy, nauseating lurch straight down into my chest. My teeth had clamped down hard on the inside of my cheek during the impact. Hot, fresh blood pooled under my tongue. I swallowed it. It tasted like dirty pennies and old rust. That metallic burn coating my throat was the absolute end. It was the final, undeniable proof that the little brother I used to read to at night was dead. He was gone, replaced by a greedy, entitled stranger who was willing to cave my face in just to make a down payment on a truck. The physical pain in my head was a gift. It killed whatever pathetic, lingering affection I had left for him. The ringing in my ears was loud, a high-pitched drone that drowned out the stunned, horrified silence of the gym. Through that static, a cold, raspy voice echoed from a past life. A man who taught me how to survive when the hot dirt burned your skin off. Make yourself small. Watch the hips. Break the foundation. I blinked hard, forcing the white spots out of my vision. I lowered my chin again. Across the blue mat, Jude was gasping. He looked down at his swollen, misshapen hand, then looked up at me. The realization hit him. He hadn't punched a tired, broken woman. He had just punched a block of iron. But the shock in his eyes only lasted a second. Then the humiliation took over. The fact that he was hurt, bleeding, and embarrassed in front of his wife snapped the last frayed thread of his sanity. He let out a guttural, wet roar, completely abandoning his boxing stance. His eyes bloodshot and wild, he lowered his center of gravity and lunged forward again. The sports match was over. The street fight had just begun. Jude's humiliation completely blinded him. The pain in his shattered right hand wasn't a wake-up call. It was gasoline. He let out a wet, guttural roar. Heavy breaths puffed from his lungs, smelling like 6 sweet energy drinks and sour adrenaline. He completely forgot every boxing lesson he ever paid for. He lunged at me, swinging his thick left arm in a wild, frantic windmill. Outside the ropes, the gym bros slammed their hands against the canvas apron. "Take her head off, Jude," one of them hollered. Down by the turnbuckle, the rhythmic smack-smack of Lacey chewing her gum kept perfect time with Jude's chaotic swings. She had her phone up, the red recording light blinking. She wanted to catch the exact moment her husband put me in the hospital so they could laugh about it over cheap beers. I didn't raise my fists. I didn't need to. I just watched his shoulders. When a man swings entirely out of anger, he becomes a broken machine. His center of gravity pulls too far forward. His chin lifts. I took 1/2 step backward, just enough to let his heavy leather glove slice through the humid air an inch from my nose. Jude grunted, planting his feet wide. He dropped his left shoulder, twisting his thick waist to load up a massive looping uppercut. He wanted to rip my head clean off my shoulders. He swung. The glove traveled upward in a brutal, heavy arc. I didn't block it. Instead, I sucked in my stomach and pivoted my lead foot, sliding at a sharp diagonal angle. I stepped right past the incoming punch, slipping perfectly into the dead, empty space just under his raised arm. His fist hit absolutely nothing. 210 pounds of bone muscle and blind rage suddenly had nothing to stop its forward momentum. Jude pitched forward, his heavy boots stumbling over each other on the sticky vinyl mat. As he fell past me, I didn't throw a hook. I didn't throw a cross. I just raised my bare, calloused hands and placed my flat palms squarely against his sweaty, heaving chest. I planted my back foot, twisted my hips, and shoved. It was just basic physics. Gravity and his own reckless ego did the rest. Jude's feet flew out from under him. He went airborne for a split second before slamming flat onto his back. The impact echoed like a shotgun blast inside the quiet gym. His spine hit the hard plywood beneath the thin canvas. The air violently forced its way out of his lungs in a sickening, strangled "oof." The blaring shouts of his gym buddies died instantly. The heavy silence that fell over the room was deafening. The only sound left was the buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead. I glanced past the ropes. The smug, chewing smile had completely frozen on Lacey's face. Her phone slowly lowered. I stood perfectly still in the center of the ring. I lifted the back of my thumb and calmly wiped a thin smear of blood from my bottom lip. I looked down at the golden boy, the brother who thought he could sell my life out from under me, currently gasping like a fish on dry land. If you're listening to this right now, you know how good it feels to watch a bully finally hit the floor. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to support me. Drop a comment below with the word ego. Have you ever watched a loudmouth relative completely humiliate themselves because they were too arrogant? Tell me your story. Jude rolled onto his side, coughing violently as he tried to suck the stale air back into his lungs. His face was a dark, mottled purple. He slowly pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. The embarrassment radiating off him was thick enough to choke on. When he finally looked up at me, the last shred of human decency in his eyes was gone. They were bloodshot wide and entirely feral. He didn't stand up into a traditional boxing stance. He stayed low. He planted his wide feet, dropping his weight into a deep, ugly crouch. The sport was over. The street brawl had just begun. Jude pushed himself up off the sticky vinyl, his heavy breath wheezing through his teeth. His face was a dark, mottled crimson, completely flushed with the kind of deep, burning humiliation you only feel when your own ego betrays you in front of a crowd. He spit a string of gutter trash curses, the crude slang echoing off the cinder block walls, his voice cracking under the weight of his own embarrassment. I watched him struggle to his knees. A short, quiet sigh escaped my lips. The air I pushed out carried the heavy metallic smell of copper from the fresh cut inside my cheek. My joints let out a sharp, dry series of pops as I rolled my shoulders back. It was time to drop the act. I stopped shrinking myself. I stopped playing the worn-out, hunchbacked sister desperate for a scrap of family loyalty. I opened my hips. I planted my bare feet flat on the tacky mat, sinking my weight down into my heels, building an anchor straight into the floorboards, just like pouring concrete. I didn't raise my hands to protect my face. I let them hang loose near my waist. My palms were completely open. No fists. Fists mean you are angry. Open hands mean you are ready to work. Seeing me just stand there completely unfazed snapped something ugly and primitive inside Jude's brain. The boxing match was over. He didn't want to just knock me out anymore. He wanted to break me. He wanted to hear me beg. He let out a sick, feral grunt and charged. He kept his head down, arms spread wide like a set of heavy meat hooks. He aimed straight for my waist. In his frantic, adrenaline-soaked mind, he figured his sheer size was enough. 210 pounds of bone and muscle colliding with a skinny, tired woman. He wanted to smother me, crush my ribs under his thick chest, and force me to cry out in front of his cheering wife. He was dead wrong. When a heavy object moves too fast, you don't build a wall to stop it. You open a door and let it fall down the stairs. I didn't brace for the impact. I didn't tense up. I took a micro step backward, just 2 inches. A tiny, imperceptible shift that created a hollow pocket of empty space right where my hips used to be. Jude's head brushed past my ribs, entirely missing his target. As he lunged into the empty air, I moved my hands. My left palm clamped down hard onto the sweaty, thick skin at the back of his neck. My right hand hooked deep into the wide, elastic waistband of his athletic shorts. I didn't use an ounce of my own strength to fight him. I just grabbed the steering wheel of his blind rage. I pulled his neck and yanked his hips, forcing his massive forward-falling weight to take a sharp, violent nosedive straight down. The impact rattled the steel ring posts. Smash! 210 pounds of dead weight plowed face first into the unforgiving plywood hidden just beneath the thin canvas mat. The sickening sound of flesh and cartilage grinding against the stiff vinyl echoed through the gym. Jude's body went completely limp for a second. His nose was smashed flat against the mat. A thick, dark stream of blood immediately began to pool under his cheek, staining the blue plastic. He laid there, his mouth hanging open, gasping for air that his rattled brain couldn't process. The gym was dead silent. The heavy bass from the speakers was gone. Only the hum of the industrial fan and the nervous squeak of Lacey's sneakers shifting on the concrete floor remained. I took one step back. My bare feet made a soft, sticky sound on the mat. My breathing was slow, perfectly measured. I looked down at the massive bleeding man who had just tried to sell my life away. 2 minutes left, Jude, I said softly. Jude pushed himself up off the mat, resting heavily on his good hand. His broad chest heaved. Blood from his flattened nose dripped down onto his skin, smearing into a thick, dark mess. He wiped the back of his wrist across his mouth, his eyes completely hollowed out by rage. He didn't glance at his wife. He didn't look at his friends. He just lunged. This time there were no wide looping punches. He grabbed me like a barroom brawler. His thick forearms shot out like heavy steel clamps, wrapping tight around the back of my neck. He interlocked his fingers, pulling my head down toward his waist with the full, desperate weight of his body. His hot, ragged breath blasted against my cheek. It smelled like copper stale sweat and pure, unfiltered hatred. Without a single second of hesitation, Jude jerked his right knee straight up. He aimed a vicious driving spike of bone directly into my exposed left ribcage. It wasn't a warning. It was a finishing move meant to put me in a hospital bed so he could take the house key from my pocket. Thud. The impact was heavy, dry, and hollow. The sound vibrated straight up my spine. It wasn't a clean break. It was the sickening, deep grind of cartilage popping and shifting out of place. My lower ribs snapped inward. A blinding flash of white-hot agony tore through my chest. The air instantly vanished from my lungs. My vision blurred, the harsh fluorescent lights swimming above me. Below the ropes, Lacey let out a sharp, piercing shriek of laughter, clapping her hands together like she was watching a dog perform a cheap trick. That high, squealing laugh broke the last chain holding me back. The searing pain in my ribs didn't make me collapse. It acted like a master key violently unlocking a door in my brain I had kept dead-bolted for 5 years. Suddenly, I wasn't standing in a humid gym in Ohio anymore. The smell of cheap body spray faded into the suffocating stench of burning sand and crushed concrete. The blinding lights turned into the pitch-black darkness of a crumbled basement halfway across the world, where hesitation meant coming home in a pine box. Jude smirked. I felt his grip shift on my neck as he planted his back foot, loading up to drive his knee into my broken ribs a second time. He never got the chance. I didn't struggle. I didn't try to peel his massive hands off my neck. I just opened my eyes wide. I drove both of my thumbs stiff and hard as steel framing nails straight into the soft, hollow dip at the base of his throat, right where the collarbones meet. I buried them deep into the vulnerable flesh, shoving inward and jerking upward with a sudden, vicious burst of force. Jude's eyes rolled back. His body violently convulsed. His windpipe choked off instantly. The human body's deepest, most primal panic set in. A harsh, wet gagging sound erupted from his mouth as his reflexes desperately fought for a single breath of air. His thick fingers immediately released my neck. His arms fell limply to his sides, clutching at his own throat. He stumbled backward, gasping and wide-eyed, completely helpless. The older sister he thought he could beat into submission was gone. The cage door was wide open. Jude's hands fell away from my neck. His throat spasmed. Before he could suck in a single breath, I moved. I stepped into him, grabbing a fistful of his sweat-soaked hair at the back of his skull. At the exact same time, I drove my right forearm straight across his face, the hard bone of my wrist smashing into the soft tissue of his jaw. The brutal torque violently snapped his head to the side. His balance shattered. I swept my bare foot hard against his ankle, kicking out his only remaining support. We both crashed down onto the sticky vinyl mat. He landed flat on his back. My own broken ribs screamed, a sharp stabbing heat radiating through my left side, but I ignored it. I fed the pain into my grip. Jude thrashed wildly, bucking his hips, trying to roll me off. He was 210 pounds of pure panic. I didn't waste energy wrestling him. I slid my knees up high under his armpits and sat entirely on his chest. I relaxed every muscle in my upper body, condensing my entire weight into one solid, immovable block of stone, crushing his ribs. His lungs flattened. His mouth hung open in a silent, desperate gasp. I stared down at his purpling face. These were the same hands that used to wash his dirty clothes. The same hands that cooked his dinner when our dad was passed out drunk on the couch. The same hands that folded the cash I sent him to buy his first car. Now they were going to put him to sleep. Jude panicked. He made the dumbest mistake a guy can make in a street fight. He reached up and pushed hard against my chest, trying to bench press me off him. I just let him push. I slipped both of my arms inside his wide grip, flattening my body completely against his. I dropped my heavy head, grinding the sharp, bony point of my chin directly into the soft socket of his right eye. The intense, agonizing friction forced his eye shut with a wet groan. While he was blinded by the pain, I slid my left forearm deep under the back of his neck, feeling the cold, damp sweat on the mat. I brought my right arm straight across his crushed windpipe, grabbing a thick handful of his heavy athletic shirt. I locked the grip tight, clamping down hard on the major arteries in his neck. The blood flow to his brain stopped instantly. Jude started thrashing like a shark caught in a heavy net. The bare heels of his feet shrieked against the blue canvas as he kicked wildly into the empty air. His thick fingers clawed desperately at my arms. His dirty fingernails dug deep into my skin, tearing the flesh open, leaving hot, bright red scratches down my forearms. The sting of my torn skin mixed with the metallic taste of blood still pooling under my tongue. I didn't blink. My heart rate didn't spike. I breathed in a slow, steady 4-second rhythm through my nose, completely detached from the frantic biological desperation fighting underneath me. If you are listening to this right now, and you believe that abusive bullies finally getting what they deserve is the best feeling in the world, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Drop a comment below with the word payback. Have you ever had to cut a toxic family member out of your life for good? Let me know I'm not alone. I lowered my face in the shadows. I pressed my sweaty forehead tight against his ear. The gym around us was dead silent, save for the wet, suffocating sounds bubbling up from the back of his throat. His eyes started to roll backward, the dull whites showing through the bruised, swollen lids. 3 seconds, Jude, I whispered. It wasn't a threat. It was a biological fact. The violent thrashing under my legs slowed down. Jude's face was a dark, bruised plum color. His eyes rolled up toward the cheap ceiling tiles, the pupils blown wide and glassy. He was right on the razor-thin edge of passing out entirely. Just before the last spark of consciousness faded, his heavy right hand weakly lifted off the mat. It flopped down against the blue vinyl in a frantic, desperate rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. I let go instantly. I didn't hold it for an extra second to prove a point. I didn't spit on him or yell. I just unlaced my grip from his collar and stood up. I stepped backward, dropping heavily onto one knee near the turnbuckle. I pressed my palm hard against my broken left rib, sucking in short, jagged breaths of the humid air. Jude immediately rolled onto his side. He curled into a tight, pathetic ball, coughing so hard his entire body shook. Thick strands of saliva and blood hung from his lips. He dry heaved, making wet scraping sounds in his throat as his flattened lungs begged for oxygen. The golden boy. The tough guy who was going to throw me out on the street. He was crying on the floor like a frightened child. The gym was as silent as a graveyard. The heavy thud of the bass from the speakers was long gone. The crowd of tattooed gym bros had backed away from the ring apron. They pressed themselves against the cinder block walls, staring at the floor, absolutely terrified to even breathe too loudly. Down by the ropes, all the color had drained from Lacey's face. She looked like a ghost. Her hands were shaking so violently that her phone slipped from her grip. It hit the cold concrete floor with a sharp plastic smack, but she didn't even look down to pick it up. She just stared at her husband, clutching her own throat. Old Mac stepped forward. His bad knee dragged slightly across the floor. He didn't look at Jude. There was no pity in the old man's eyes, only a heavy, solemn understanding. Mac bent down and picked up the scattered pages of the deed. Without saying a single word, he gripped the thick stack of papers in his massive hands and ripped them straight down the middle. Then, he tore them again. The dry tearing sound of the heavy paper echoed loudly in the dead quiet room. He walked over and held out the torn shreds. I reached out with a trembling, blood-scratched hand and took them. I shoved the pieces deep into the side pocket of my cargo pants. "Thanks, Mac," I rasped. I pushed myself up, ignoring the blinding spike of pain shooting through my ribcage. I limped over to the edge of the ring, grabbed my heavy leather work boots, and shoved my bare feet into them. I didn't even bother tying the frayed laces. I turned and walked toward the short set of metal stairs. Jude was still on his knees, clutching his bruised throat, his face slick with tears and blood. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and completely broken. He expected me to scream at him. He expected me to gloat, to tell him how pathetic he was. I didn't give him the satisfaction of my anger. He wasn't worth the energy. I paused right next to him. I looked down at his crushed right hand, already swelling up like a purple balloon inside the white tape. "Tuck your chin when you throw an overhand," I said. My voice was flat and hollow like a mechanic pointing out a stripped bolt. "You're going to break your scaphoid bone if you keep swinging like an amateur." I didn't wait for him to answer. I turned my back on him. I walked down the metal stairs, pushed open the heavy glass door, and stepped out into the suffocating Ohio night. The heavy glass door of Jude's gym swung shut behind me, cutting off the stagnant smell of sweat. The muggy July night hit me like a wet, heavy blanket. I dragged my work boots across the pothole-ridden asphalt, my body leaning heavily to the left to favor my broken rib. Climbing into the cab of my Ford F-150 took everything I had. I shoved the key into the ignition and twisted. The old engine whined, coughed, and finally roared to life, vibrating roughly through the floorboards. I dropped my forehead against the cracked leather steering wheel. The adrenaline drained out of my blood, leaving behind a massive hollow crater of exhaustion. My chest screamed with every shallow breath. My heart felt like it had been dragged over broken glass. But I reached down. I slid my rough hand into the deep pocket of my cargo pants. My fingers wrapped around the torn shreds of heavy paper. The deed. My grandfather's house was safe. The ugly, rotting rope tying me to a toxic, greedy family was finally severed. They were gone. I was entirely alone, and for the first time in years, I could actually breathe. By the next morning, the Ohio sky had turned the color of bruised iron. A heavy summer storm was rolling in thick and fast. I stood frozen at the checkout counter inside Henderson's Hardware. The small store smelled like machine oil, sawdust, and old coffee. I bought a heavy box of galvanized nails and 2 bundles of pressure-treated pine. Every tiny movement made the muscles in my chest lock up in blinding agony. Old Man Henderson looked up from the cash register. He froze, staring directly at the dark purple bruise blooming across my left cheekbone. "Take another bad spill off that porch ladder, Laney?" he asked. His voice was soft, heavy, with the kind of pity working folks give each other when they know better than to pry. I forced a tight smile, sliding 2 $20 bills across the scratched glass counter. "Yeah, Mr. Henderson, Mr. Rung in the dark. You gotta be careful, girl. You can't keep carrying the whole damn load by yourself," the old man muttered, shaking his head as he handed me my change. I just gave him a quiet nod. I didn't tell him that carrying the load alone was the only way I knew how to survive. I picked up the heavy box of hardware, gritted my teeth against the sharp stab in my ribs, and carried it out to the truck. An hour later, I was standing back under the sagging roof of my grandfather's front porch. The wind picked up, whipping the tall grass in the yard, carrying the sharp, damp smell of rain. I didn't have the money to hire a crew. I didn't have a family to ask for a favor anymore. It was just me. I grabbed my heavy claw hammer. I forced myself up the wooden rungs of the stepladder. I lined up a fresh, thick nail against the new support beam. I pulled my arm back and swung the heavy steel head. Smack. The wood groaned, biting into the metal. I swung again. And again. Sweat ran down my forehead, stinging the corners of my eyes. The physical labor was brutal, but it grounded me. I didn't feel like a triumphant hero. I was just a tired, solitary woman trying to keep the roof from caving in on her last piece of peace. I brought the hammer down one last time, driving the nail perfectly flush with the weathered wood. I lowered my aching arm and let out a long, slow breath. A low rumble of thunder shook the ground miles away. The storm was coming. But the porch felt solid under my boots. The house was going to hold. The real fight doesn't end on a canvas mat, and it doesn't end when the crowd finally goes quiet. It ends when you wake up the next morning, pick up your tools, and build your own peace in a world that constantly tries to tear it down. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I appreciate every single one of you who took the time to hear me out. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and goodbye.